Hello and welcome to episode 144 of MMO Weekly, presented as always by Chitty's Cheesesteaks. I'm Sal Manzo, joined by John Luke Chaparro, Matthias Alma Kirasaki. Guys, the Mets are 8-8 in June. The last time we spoke, I think they were coming off the Mariners series, so the very beginning of June. They're 8-8 so far. Up and down series, took 2 out of 3 from the Braves, which is nice to see. Then they get manhandled by the Reds. They win yesterday against the Phillies, but more of the same kind of from the Mets, up and down. The Mets outfield is good. That seems to be set. If there's one positive from this year so far, that's a good thing. Bo Bichette swinging the bat good. He seems to be turning it around. We'd love to see that. But Mark Vientos, obviously he tried to change things a bit in Cincy, but he's pretty bad. And the Mets just continue to be up and down here. So, fellas, good to see you. Matthias, we'll start with you. Just your thoughts here with the Mets halfway through the June slate so far.
Yeah, it's sort of sports purgatory. You know, they lose 2 in a row, then they win 2 in a row. You know, they just keep alternating like series losses, series wins. And the way they're losing series, though, is like they lose the first 2 games of the series, and you're like, all right, you lose tomorrow, this thing's going off the rails. You're 10 games under 500 again. And then they'll win. And then, you know, we saw this, especially I felt like on the last homestand. They lose those first 2 games in pretty ugly fashion to the Cardinals. They snap out of it with a nice win, nice comeback win. They take 2 out of 3 from the Braves, and they go on the road and get just smacked around by the Reds, a Reds team that does not have great offense. But they respond. You know, Nolan McLean has this great bounce back outing. They win a pretty inspiring game, I would say, in Philadelphia, which is big. That's their first match of the year, and the Phillies have been on fire ever since they installed Don Mattingly as their manager. So they're overall 24-20 since May 1st. They keep alternating these series wins and series losses. They're only 5 back of a playoff spot, which is crazy because they have the 3rd worst record in the National League. But it's a tough spot because they're not bad enough where you could say blow up the team entirely, like forget everything, hold on to only the key pieces. But they're also not good enough to the point where you're like, all right, they need to go all in to try to secure a playoff spot, go after the pennant. And look, we know that once you get to the postseason, anything can happen. I mean, look, the Arizona Diamondbacks won 83 games with a negative run differential in 2023 and won the NL pennant. But yeah, like you were saying, the outfield looks great. Juan Soto in particular is on fire. He's leading the National League in OPS. You know, I actually will point out that Marcus Semion's looked a little more alive lately. His OPS is 750 in June, and he's hitting 318 with runners in scoring position. You're getting basically everything you can out of the various platoon parts, with whether it's Jared Young or Eric Wagaman. And, you know, Francisco Lindor, in theory, is going to be back the next homestand. So on one hand, things are sort of looking up. On the other hand, they need to snap out of this inconsistency, because if not, you're going to be looking at a team that's, you know, 7 games under 500 entering July. It's kind of hard to talk yourself into this team being a serious contender. But they're showing flashes of something good. It's just they're also showing flashes of a team that isn't remotely competitive.
You know, it's like I say, and I say this constantly, and everybody that knows me knows that I say this all the time. And I think I might have said this on the last podcast or 2 podcasts ago. This team is the biggest tease in the world. You know, you look at the Knicks, right? And of course, it wouldn't be a podcast about a New York team if I didn't bring up the Knicks. They were so consistent, not only just throughout the regular season, but just throughout the playoffs, where they hit some adversity and then they were able to hit a stride and they took off. The 2024 New York Mets were the same way. They hit a stride and were able to take off, and it led to them making it to basically two wins away from a World Series. This team has not had that moment yet. The 2026 Mets have not had that moment yet, unfortunately. And it seems like you guys were alluding to, 2 steps forward, 2 steps back, 1 step forward, 3 steps back. You know, Christian Scott finally is beginning to feel his way through. He's hurt. You know, he's got a hip injury. Hey, Nolan McLean is starting to figure it out. Sean Manaea, probably not as good as he should be. You know, stuff like that has kind of gone on throughout the season. But I guess what kind of stands out to me the most throughout this stretch is the fact that there is some life, and you cannot discredit that entirely. Okay. We can say what we want about Mendoza. We can say what we want about certain players, but clearly there is an effort to try and right the ship. And with Francisco Lindor returning, that's another bat you can add to the lineup that could probably add maybe 2 or 3 more runs a week, which you wouldn't think would make much of a difference, but it really would. Also, defensively, putting his glove, albeit not as good as it was when he first got here in 2021, but still a very competent, solid glove that complements Marcus Semion's defense, which you guys alluded to. He's been great. He's been hitting with runners in scoring position, like you said, Matthias, but also his glove has been tremendous, which is ultimately what they brought him here for. So that's been a positive. You mentioned Eric Wagaman. I was yelling at my TV the other day. Why is Eric Wagaman coming in for Jared Young? Why? The heck with the lefty righty matchups. I kind of can't stand it sometimes. And then he gets the go ahead hit against the Phillies in the first game of that series. So, guys are beginning to come through. And I think what's happening now is the injuries are forcing players to get a little bit overexposed, and obviously throughout all this, the rotation still has some glaring issues, so to speak. Kodai Senga was a bit rocky in his first start with Cincinnati, but he did calm down a little bit and did not give up a run after his shaky first inning. But, you still need to not give up 2 home runs in a row and walk a bunch of people, which, would definitely help the Mets, But other than that, you guys touched on it a lot. Bichette's been hitting. That's probably the thing that's really been, getting me, a little bit more inspired the most, is that he's kind of coming through. Obviously, Juan Soto is going to be Juan Soto. AJ Ewing. Actually, now that I think about it, I think I can't remember too well exactly, either Vientos or Wagaman pinched hit for either Jared Young or AJ Ewing, which is fine.
They both pinch hit. Yeah, Wagaman.
Yeah.
Wagaman batted for Ewing, and trust me,
Yeah,
I also in the moment disagreed with it. I'll just be straight up.
Right. So, but these things are working out. I never thought Eric Wagaman would get a game-winning, go-ahead hit for the Mets. He seems to be competent enough to be a bench role whenever they need him to fill in for depth. Fine, but ultimately, at the end of the day, it's something needs to happen. Whether hopefully Lindor can spark this, where players who are coming back push other players into different roles, and what that will allow is for the team to finally get into a groove. Because again, you have that wonderful series against Atlanta where you're beating the best team in baseball. I was at the Saturday game and they even looked good at that one and they lost. So, and then you go on the road and you get your face kicked in by the Cincinnati Reds. Oh my gosh, how deflating is that? So hopefully, with the return of Lindor, who can add that energy on the field, because you can only do so much being in the dugout, and hopefully somebody in the rotation, whether it's Senga, somebody they call up, or maybe, Tobias Myers figures it out again after having a rough outing his last time out after coming back up from AAA. Somebody can help bridge the gap until somebody else returns, because it seems like Manaea is beginning to figure it out a little bit against the tough Phillies offense. Obviously, Nolan McLean looked really good the other day against Cincinnati. And of course, Freddie Peralta. You kind of have to take it for what it's worth with him. Whether he's going to be a little bit more consistent with his pitches instead of throwing a million pitches in one inning, who knows? But all these things kind of have to fall right, but it's not impossible. So there are signs, but it's also infuriatingly maddening that they just can't seem to right the ship fully yet. But it's not July yet. We're like 2.5, maybe less than 2 weeks away from that. But if you're still at least within 5 games going into July, right around the holiday, or at least mid-July, and you're still hovering around, you got to believe there's still a chance. And look, I know I sound like the crazy optimist here, but I mean, crazier things have happened. I mean, the Knicks won a title, for goodness sake. Anything can happen.
Yeah, no, I know. Pigs are flying, hell is frozen over, whatever you want to say with the Knicks. Hopefully the Mets can follow some of that good juju. But, the thing I look at now, Lindor coming back would be a big addition, right? That would really kind of stabilize things on the infield. You know what you're getting with him, having your kind of pseudo captain back. I think the problem is at this point, even if the Mets start getting in a groove, start playing well, they're going to have to leapfrog 5 or 6 teams, which, obviously with 2 wild cards, it's easier, but it's a hard hole you put yourselves in. I don't want to tone down the optimism. I think anything can happen. Like we just saw, like you said, with the Knicks, they've never been good in my whole life. So to see that happen was great. But conceivably, listen, if Lindor comes back and he could be second half Lindor from 2024, sure. let's roll. And the pitching can pitch deep in the games for them, but like you guys alluded to, they're just not being consistent enough. So hopefully they can get on a roll. Lindor coming back would hopefully maybe help that a bit more. It's just a lot of teams to leapfrog now. I don't know if they can overcome that. And you talk about Don Mattingly, right? The Phillies are playing a lot better since he was put in place after the Phillies fired their manager. I guess I keep going back. I know it's not all on Mendoza, but I'm still just shocked that this guy has a job here. He's not getting renewed after the season. He's not going to be managing the Mets in 2027 or beyond or whatever. The next time the Mets play baseball after this year, but it just feels like maybe some of that would help them a little more shot in the arm. Who knows? But you look at the Phillies. They've done that a couple of times now. It seemed to have worked. But you mentioned the outfield. I know I alluded to it at the beginning of the show, but it's looking great. Juan Soto's Juan Soto. We know what he brings to this table. He's awesome. AJ Ewing's been a lot of fun to watch in center field. I know he threw a bad ball off the mound yesterday, kind of bad luck kind of deal. But the guy's got a great arm, and he covers a hell of a lot of ground out there. He's real fast. Carson Benge, we've talked about it now every time we're on the show. I know we talked about he was swinging the bat better the last time we were on, but he's getting more and more comfortable, and I'm glad the Mets decided with seeing what was going on with this team right now not to panic and send him back down to AAA too hastily or whatever. Let him have his growing pains up here with everything that's going on to begin with this year. And you're seeing it's paying off. This is a guy that I think hopefully as time goes on is going to benefit for being up here, playing through this, hitting through these struggles, because he's someone that also seems to have a pretty good knowledge of the strike zone like AJ Ewing does. And he's using the ball to all fields. He's hitting the ball with a lot more power now. Just seems to be having confidence and playing a lot more looser up at the plate. So you see why the Mets were, really in love with this guy, why they made a spot for him in the outfield before the year started. So, that's a big positive, at least, talk about with the Mets. And I know I mentioned Vientos, earlier. I guess we could touch on the not so good. I know he was better in Cincinnati at a pinch hit homer, but just he's not good, not a good hitter. I don't even know if you trade him. I don't know if you, at this point, you cut bait with the DFA maybe. I assume Polanco's not coming back anytime soon now, so I don't know if they do at first base. If they just decide, you bring up Ryan Clifford and see what you get there. I don't know if they're at that point yet, but I imagine it's getting pretty close. Jared Young, I guess, can be the right hand, or I shouldn't say that he's a left-hand hitter as well, but can play the bulk of that first base veteran guy, I guess. He's done that pretty well, it seems, so far this year, making that transition. So first base is a revolving door. That stinks. But, it's a weird year to begin with, and it's kind of where the Mets are at. So I guess we can kind of talk about the not so good with that. And touch on Vientos' struggles and whatnot.
Yeah, it's a tough spot because Vientos, like we said, did show some signs of life in Cincinnati. And by the way, he worked a very good at bat against Jose Alvarado yesterday, and that kind of led to Wagaman's pinch hit RBI single. He was down to 2-strike count, and he just kept laying off that cutter. And that was, some signs of life, I think, there. And the tough part here is that he's good at one thing this year, and that he's hitting lefties. He's hitting over 280 against lefties. He's been a complete non-factor against righties, and his numbers with runners in scoring position are solid. But at this point, when Lindor comes back, we're in a roster crunch here. Zach Short probably gets DFA'd. That's, I think, a given here. You roll with Lindor at short, and if he needs a day off, you go to Bichette. Assuming Polanco comes back at some point, it seems like he's probably going to be more of a DH. And then Jared Young has done enough, in my opinion, to warrant a roster spot. He's a far better defender than anyone they have at first base. He's actually among the best defensive first basemen in baseball, if you wouldn't believe it. And that's with all that time missed due to his injury. And I know that his bat has cooled off a little bit, but still, Jared Young deserves a roster spot. And Eric Wagaman is proving to be that veteran righty platoon bat that this team missed. So they're all outperforming Vientos. And I think, we've reached the point where despite his abilities against left-handed pitching, I don't know if I see a roster spot for him. And I haven't even touched on Brett Beatty, who also has not been hitting particularly well, but he provides enough versatility in the field, and he plays a good enough third base where you know he has a position. So it's a really tough spot to be in because I know we were dogging on Vientos on the last show, and he has slowly looked a little bit more like the guy we were looking for. But yeah, like it's really just hard to imagine him having a permanent roster spot. And with him being out of minor league options, I would hate to see him go on the waiver wire, but I mean, if he goes on the waiver wire, some team will bite on him and maybe you get something in return because deep down, like we've said in the past, there is a hitter in there. It's just right now we haven't seen it consistently.
I think that's the most infuriating part about Vientos is that he, again, the Mets and the word tease and the Mets, whether it's the player or the team itself, seem to be synonymous, especially this year. And that's the thing that kind of gets me on Vientos is that, like you said, and we've said this before, there is a ball player in there, but that's the most frustrating thing about it is the talent is there. Maybe not as athletic on the field as he should be, but he has home run power. If he were to really go deep into the player that he could be, he could really be a Pete Alonso light with how much power he has because when he connects on a ball, it doesn't just go, it flies out of there. And having seen a lot of his home runs in person, he does not miss when he makes contact. The only problem is when he makes contact or if he makes contact. That's kind of the thing. And you mentioned Beatty having the versatility on the field. You can't put Vientos at third anymore because he's essentially just a rock out there, not in the good way. He's not athletic enough to cover the corners in that sense, whether it's towards the shortstop side or even towards the line. Beatty's fine with that. Even Bichette is good enough to do that. You talk about Jorge Polanco. He ramped up a little bit on his rehab assignment. He had to sit down because maybe the inflammation came back and it seemed a bit too much. But I think that towards maybe, the middle of June, we might see something come out for him again. And, you know, if I had to pick at this current moment, whether it's Vientos or an oft-injured Jorge Polanco, I'm picking the oft-injured Jorge Polanco because Jorge Polanco can hit and he's a switch hitter. So with Vientos, it kind of seems like, yeah, he'll hit you that home run, and it's great because it looks like, hey, maybe this is the start of something. But then he goes on like a 1-for-20 streak where he strikes out every single time. And you alluded to the at bat against Jose Alvarado. That's what kills me about him is that he has it in him to say, okay, I'm going to be patient. I'm going to wait for my pitch. And if I don't get it, I'm not going to swing. But then there's other moments where you see the most non-competitive at bat ever in your life where he would just flail out a pitch 20 feet out of the strike zone. And it's getting to the point, like you guys said, is are the Mets willingly going to allow this to keep happening when there are other options that are better and available for them to use? Honestly, I would hate to see them lose Eric Wagaman because of the fact that he can actually provide some versatility, whether it's off the bench or even on the field. For a guy who is going to strike out 70% of the time, maybe more than that. And that's not something that this team needs currently. If the team was in a bit more of a rut and they were already out of the playoffs, fine. I would say, sure, just let them play because there's nothing to play for. But you alluded to Jared Young, which, that defensive statistic is incredibly surprising, but I'm not shocked by it at the same time because he's really good out there. But he has a power bat who can also make contact. He's proven that he can either go the other way or he's very adept at hitting it up the middle too, which I've seen. But he's very adept at making contact when he needs to drive in runs. He's really good at runners in scoring position. And who else are you going to take away for Vientos? You just can't justify it. You're not sending down AJ Ewing again because he's clearly a staple out in center field. Benge isn't going anywhere, like you guys said. Tyrone Taylor is probably going to end up taking a spot at some point from somebody because he's coming back soon. So where does Vientos fit in all of this? I don't think he does, and it's a shame. So let him go to Seattle. Let him go to Colorado. Let him go to, I don't know, let him go to San Diego and or have him go to Sacramento and just shoo off somewhere because it's not going to work out here. And I hate to keep beating a dead horse, but this is a podcast about a New York team, and that's what we do is we beat a dead horse, especially if it keeps happening. So I don't know if David Stearns already has something lined up for him. Nobody wanted him in the offseason. Nobody wanted him last year. So I think they're just going to have to rip the Band-Aid off and just let him go. There's no room for him on a team that's trying to win.
You know, I don't know why we keep talking about him getting a hit off a basketball player. He should get a hit off a basketball player every time. Jose Alvarado. Come on, guys. That's really not that big of a deal. That means how bad he is. We're celebrating that. Sorry, that was an easy joke. I couldn't help myself. But yeah, you know, obviously they're going to need to cut bait with him. I wonder if the Mets could. I guess not. I talk about consistency, and they really haven't had enough consistent pitching this year more than anything, too. Do you call a team like the Giants and say, I know it's a punt this year, but maybe for next year? Do you look at trying to take on a Devers, a Adames, or a Chapman? Do you say, you know, we'll give you Marcus Semien, you take the rest of that money, and we'll take on Willie Adames? Do you do something like that? I don't know. I think the Mets are going to be sellers more than anything. But, you know, I'm just trying to think if there's any of those kind of plays they can do to help the team for next year, while dumping some of these bad contracts for this year. I know the Giants are selling house, but I just think it's not going to be a lot of excitement really for the Mets either way at the deadline. We talked off air about Peralta staying or not. I don't really know. I would think they'd try and trade him, since he's on a 1-year deal, and I don't know if he's coming back or not. I would think the Mets are going to try and throw their eggs into the Scooble basket, whether that happens or not. But I don't know. It's just, again, it's like one of these weird spots where they playing a little better but not consistent enough, and you keep using that word tease, John Luke. You're going to have Lindor come back sooner than later, and they'll probably hit a little better of him and Soto back in the lineup together. But it's just, again, I keep going back. You're going to be able to leapfrog 5 or 6 teams, even if you're 7 games back. I think that's hard to do. Even, you know, with it being June, you know, I don't know. I don't know kind of what they do, kind of going forward. They just have to play better. They have to play more consistent, right? The bullpen's been good. The starting pitching's been up and down, but the pen's been a lot better. Luke Weaver's been very good outside of his kind of rough start to the season a bit. He's been really good. I don't know if it lasts, but he's definitely been good of late. So there's pieces there. I know we're going to keep probably saying that the rest of the year, but you just have to see them do it consistently together.
Yeah, and the starting pitching has definitely been an issue. I mean, you look at the leaderboards, they're 17th in starting pitching ERA, but they're 4th in reliever ERA. They're 3.3 ERA out of the bullpen. If you had told me that coming in the season, I would have just not believed you. Not that I didn't believe in the bullpen. It was just like I did not think they were going to be elite necessarily. And so far, it actually has been. You know, Luke Weaver has been magnificent ever since the end of April. Devin Williams, I mean, it's tough with Devin Williams because his ERA is heavily inflated by like a couple of really bad outings. But in general, Devin Williams has been pretty good. Brooks Raley has been Brooks Raley. AJ Minter, for the most part, has been like AJ Minter. Huascar Brazoban, now that he has sort of a more defined role, has been much better. I mean, even Austin Warren is doing his job. But the starting pitching, it seems like we go through this every year, and this predates the David Stearns era, probably even goes back beyond the Billy Epler era. They enter the year with all this depth. A bunch of guys get hurt. All of a sudden, that depth wears thin, and we end up in a problem like this. Nolan McLean was great in Cincinnati. Freddie Peralta, while he's not necessarily been an ace, has been fine. It's the figuring out whatever the heck is going on with the rest of the rotation, all right? Sean Manaea is starting to hold his own. He's looked a little bit more like the player, you know, they had in 2024. Maybe it's not quite that, but, you know, it's, you know, a solid starting pitcher. But, you know, you're going to roll out a bullpen game, or you're rolling out Kodai Senga, Tobias Myers, whatever's going on, David Peterson. It's just a weird hodgepodge of players trying to figure out the back end of that rotation. Clay Holmes' injury is really looming large right now. Hopefully he's back at some point this summer, because he was really just a rock. Felt like every time he took the mound, you knew what you were getting. And all of a sudden he gets hit by a line drive and he's out until August. Luckily he doesn't need surgery, but man, that really is hurting them right now. And then Christian Scott gets hurt, which I hurt for him. I mean, he finally looked like he had put it together. Then he goes on the IL. Hopefully it's just short term. But yeah, the starting pitching, unfortunately, is what is holding them back right now, because you're starting to see the offense click a little bit, and you're going to get the pieces back. But man, yeah, if they could figure out the rotation, I'd be a lot more confident in them.
A lot of this is dependent on Nolan McLean bouncing back, of course, because he is essentially going to be your number one. I can't say that I've been totally enthusiastic about Freddie Peralta, although he has shown flashes of him being the pitcher we expected him to be. But because the Mets are having all of this pitching issues, this is one of the reasons why I don't think that they'll actually end up trading him, Peralta. And honestly, I think that there's going to be a push to try and re-sign him. It all depends on what him and his agent are currently trying to do. I think the Mets have an idea of what they want to have in Peralta. I still think he can be a very serviceable, solid number 2 major league pitcher, whether he's behind or number 3, whether you have a Skubal come here if he decides not to sign with the Dodgers, because that apparently seems like a foregone conclusion at this point. I'm delusional and I don't refuse to believe that. But I think what they're trying to do is they're really trying to just kind of wait and see with the rotation. I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure Jack Weniger isn't ready yet, and Jonah Tong has begun to struggle more in AAA, which is kind of a Jekyll and Hyde sort of thing, because AAA is a hitter's league by far. So it's kind of more if you're, I've seen pitchers get called up from AAA who have struggled and have done well in the majors because it's a completely different ballgame. But, there's a bit of concern with Tong in that regard, where they haven't called him back up yet. He was looking okay for a little bit and then had a really bad outing and then ended up getting sent back down where he still is today. So, the bullpen, it seems to be doing the job that it's done. I thought at the beginning of the season that Austin Warren should have been on this team, and he's really kind of, after they sent him down, I thought, well, once he comes back, he should stay. And I'm really glad that the Mets decided to do that, because ever since that appearance against Minnesota, where he basically kept the team in it, and he was getting those chants at Citi Field, I really think he deserves to stay here for the rest of the season. He should honestly be on this team the next season, whether it's 27 or whenever they end up playing baseball again, if there's no lockout. Also, it also depends the way the pitching is going. It also depends on the success of Tobias Myers. I know I mentioned him a bit earlier, but it seems like either something happened mechanically or teams began to really figure him out. He just hasn't been the same as he was at the start of the season. And that's a kind of guy that a team like this currently could rely on. But at the same time, if he's continuing to get hit pretty hard, like he did his last time out, then that really hurts them as well, because he was sort of kind of the low key, stealth move of that trade with Milwaukee. And then, obviously you talk about David Peterson. That's probably the one that's been the most disappointing to me, because it seems as if the consistent problems that come up with Peterson tend to keep happening, where, yeah, he'll look good at some point, but then the whole roof will just fall off. He'll come in after an opener does, and then he'll pitch 5 solid innings. But then you say, maybe let's put him to start a game. And then he gives up 5 runs because he can't seem to get any of his pitches over after walking 3 or 4 people. So, you talk about this pitching issue having been a problem for years. I feel like, honestly, we can go even further back to probably 2017, 2018, when, DeGrom was the only one that really ended up figuring things out. But then Harvey flamed out. Syndergaard flamed out. Steven Matz was nowhere near the pitcher he was supposed to be. And then you're piecemealing certain parts of the rotation, like guys like Jared Eichhoff, for goodness sake. So, 2019 was a fun year. So, it just kind of seems to be the theme, and it's become incredibly frustrating. And then also another one that's really disappointed me is also Kodai Senga. Last season he was probably, very similar to Jacob deGrom in 2021, where he was the guy who was really making a case to potentially be one of the better pitchers in baseball, and then an injury happens and it kind of derails that. And he really hasn't been the same since, which kind of tells me that his injury was way worse than expected, and he might have been rushed back a bit quicker than he should have, because now it seems like everything is off mechanically with him. So and then, with Christian Scott going down and Clay Holmes going down, it just kind of never, they don't have the same luck that they had in 2024 where nobody got injured. So it just kind of seems like that's going to be the big thing going forward. This team we know can hit. That's not the problem. But it just all depends on whether or not the consistency from the starting rotation can push them enough to where it goes into the bullpen, who has pitched incredibly well. That's going to be the big theme going forward over the next couple of weeks. Will Kodai Senga figure it out? Does David Peterson finally not have an outing where he gives up more than 5 runs when he starts a game and doesn't look like he's lost? I mean, that's the thing that's really going to ail this team the most, or push this team up if they end up doing well.
I agree. Pitching is always key. And it just seems like every other year or so the Mets have it, they don't. It's been rough. Like you guys are talking about, it's just consistency. Can they keep playing consistent ball? Can they pitch consistently well? And outside of a couple of guys like you're especially saying, John Luke here, you haven't seen it, and it's tough to make a push when you have that. So we'll see here. Obviously, Mets off today. Could he continue their series with the Phillies this weekend? So we'll see how that goes. And we'll follow up with you as they keep going on here. Hopefully there's a run in them. Lindor comes back. Second half Lindor 2024. That's what we could push for. No more Nixon 5, so we'll do that rhyme. Lindor 2024. How about that? We'll get that going. So hopefully that happens. But between now and then, as always, everybody, let's go Mets.